is about the collapse of the oil market amid COVID-19 health crisis, a blessing or a curse. COVID-19 pandemic has disrupted dramatically the energy and financial market worldwide and the world economy as a whole. As a result of a dramatic demand and supply shock, and no country, in fact, was immune. We will discuss the state of play of energy market within this situation of supply and demand shock resulting from this situation, the macroeconomic impacts on the MENA region, and the path towards sustainable energy development to meet the Paris targets. Let me first introduce our distinguished panelists and friends. I'm very happy to have you all here today, of course, virtually. I would have preferred to have you face to face. Houda bin Jeannette Allal, she's the Director General of the Observatoire Méditerranéen de l'Énergie, OME, based in Paris. And she's also the head of the Secretariat of the Union for Mediterranean Platform on Gas. Radia Sedoui, who is the chief of the energy section in the Sustainable Development Policy Division of the UN Economic Social Commission West Asia, ESCWA, and also the president of the Arab Energy Club and the member of the Algerian Association of Renewable Energies. Also, Radia Almarzoqi, who is a member of the advisory board of the Euro-Mediterranean Economists Association and a faculty member in the Economics division at the Institute of the Diplomatic Studies in Saudi Arabia. And also he was an IMF advisor and co-chair, currently co-chair of the T20 Task Force on Investing on Infrastructure Development. We have the pleasure to have Ahmed Yusri Ibrahim, who is an expert and the representative of the Energy and Climate Change Division of the Union for the Mediterranean. Now, the first introduction to this discussion will be given by Houda on the current evolution of the energy market regionally and globally amidst COVID-19, in fact, situation of this demand and supply shock, and also the challenges and opportunities providing for the green energy sources. Houda, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. Good afternoon to everybody, and thank you very much for inviting OME to share, to participate to this webinar. So I'm trying to find a way to show the slides. Do you see the slides?
Yes, fine.
Yeah, hear me? Okay, fine. So, as I said, thank you again for the invitation, and I'm glad to see as well friends and colleagues, and welcome to all those who accepted to join us during this webinar. So I will try to make a set of the scene on what is happening globally and regionally with regards to this incredible situation the world and our region is living. Very briefly, for those who are joining us and who do not know who is OME, OME is the Association of Mediterranean Energy Companies. We are working now for more than 30 years in order to promote the regional cooperation between the Mediterranean energy in the field of energy. And so we are the voice of industry, we are a think tank and a gathering platform and training. When I will talk later on globally and regionally, just for clarification, globally would be worldwide and regionally would be the Mediterranean region. And for us, the Mediterranean region is like, as for the UN and for the Mediterranean, we gather the whole countries bordering the Mediterranean region, starting from Mauritania, surrounding the Mediterranean up to Portugal. And here you have the list of what we call Mediterranean. And then I will talk about the north and later on about the south, which is southeast and southwest est in our analysis. In my presentation, I will try to address the context in the set of the scene in 3 points. First of all, to recall very briefly the previous context, what were the situation, and then what is going on, and to have, by the end, some key consideration about the zoom and the focus on renewables in this context. So first of all, the private context. So we've been already, the energy sector, we've been already contemplating a lot of evolution tensions as well on the oil market. We've been contemplating geopolitical disruption as well and tensions. We've been contemplating new gas discoveries, especially in the region and the East Med region. Security of demand and security of supply still and will remain major issues both for producing and consuming countries. Of course, you know about the importance of climate change concerns and the importance of reaching the Paris Agreement. Of course, as well, this energy transition almost all the countries are embarked in, and the need to decarbonize the economies. We know that a lot are saying that the 3D is the future of the energy, decentralization, digitalization, decarbonization, and we've been contemplating as well multiple options and solutions which are ahead, innovation in terms of storage, hydrogen, batteries, in sectors as well, in the transport sector, building sector. So innovation is here to play an important role as well. We are also contemplating since a while now a strong willingness from the European Union to play an important role and leading role, both in terms of succeeding the energy transition and as well as combating the climate change. Now, if we make a focus on the South Med region, what are the main points I would like to share with you? First of all, the region is growing much more rapidly than the North Mediterranean part. So the socio-economic development is higher, and we are contemplating an energy mix which is largely based on hydrocarbons, and in all the scenarios, these hydrocarbons are expected to keep an important role and important share, even in the best scenarios where they put a lot of efforts like they did with their NDCs in order to contribute to reaching the Paris Agreement. If we succeed in reaching all the targets, still hydrocarbons are there to play an important role at least up to 2040 and even up to 2050. The region is endowed with very huge potential for renewable energy and energy efficiency, and all the countries have set ambitious targets and are doing a lot of effort in order to promote such sustainable development and such energy transition. What is relatively new as well is the role of energy for the social development. And since the turmoil that we've been contemplating in the region, energy is not only seen for goods for the welfare and for socio-economic development, but as well as driver for jobs as well. So this is a relatively new role which is given importance in the region. And recently, an incredible thing, invisible body, that put all the world in a standby, what I call a standby situation. So the COVID happened in such a context, and it's a novel and unprecedented situation. I think that all the analysts and you did a wonderful work on this that showed that this is a novel unprecedented situation, and which is hurting economic, financial, social, and energy crisis on the same time. The World Bank and IMF are predicting that the growth in the MENA region will be minus 3.3%, of course, which with many differences between countries, worst will be the situation in South Europe by minus 6 to 10%. Oil and gas prices have decreased very importantly, so oil 60% and gas 38%. And what the experts are telling us is that oil prices are expected to stay relatively low for a minimum 1 or 2 years, and most probably they will reach $45 in 23. With all this, we are living in a period of many uncertainties, many analyses, many things we are reading here and there and discussion, but still we are facing many uncertainties about the future. But in the same time, we can draw a lot of lessons and evidence, and the situation, the standby situation we were living and the lockdown is also full of lessons. But of course, we need to digest and to assess the real impact. And in the same time, we do know that we don't have time to lose, because more than ever, this crisis is confirming that more than ever, the choices that we make today will shape the global economy for decades to come. And this has to be done also relying on innovation, very important. So let me now give some figures about the impact. So IEA is making a lot of analysis on the global level of the impact of this COVID crisis. And their analysis show that, first of all, we see that it is, we have not seen such situation before the World War. Second is that the demand is expected to decrease by 3.8% for the first quarter of 2019, and if we continue, it might decrease up to 6% by the end of the year, so in comparison to 2019. They made also interesting analysis to show that, of course, on countries, the impact of the lockdown and how the lockdown was done, full lockdown or medium impact more severely. And for our region, you know that most of them opted for or full lockdown or medium one. So we at OME, we made as well the analysis of what's going on. We are now working on the Mediterranean energy perspective 2020, so we were already working very hard on this, and we are following what is happening. And what we contemplate is that we might reach minus 6.4% of energy reduction of the demand in 2019, in comparison of 2019, if we continue more or less as we are. Looking at now here, what energy, so what kind of energy has been affected by and would be affected by this decrease. And you have on the top part the IEA, the global, worldwide, and then the bottom one is the OME for the Mediterranean. So what we see is that all fuels, except renewables, experience a reduction, and more or less important. And this is never happened for decades. We have not seen such a situation. And so for the global part, what we can see is that oil and coal are the ones that have been more severely affected. So if we look at the oil part, what the IEA is saying is that after the first half of 2020, global consumption is expected to increase, leading to inventory draws and putting upward pressure on crude oil prices. For world natural gas consumption was falling over the first months of 2020, but this happened even before the COVID-19 pandemic, mainly due to temperature, the temperature in the northern hemisphere. Consumption fell by more than 3% in the first quarter of 2020. However, supply did not adjust to this drop in consumption, resulting in considerable buildup of gas in storage. With gas storage tanks already almost full, Europe's capacity to import and actually use the same amount of LNG as in 2019 seems unlikely. Global natural gas demand could decrease by 5% in 2020, according to IEA, and this is less than the anticipated fall in demand. Nevertheless, this drop would be largest recorded 1 year drop in. Now, when we look at what is happening in the Mediterranean, so we have a different story here. The Med countries are affected differently, and in France, nuclear production is expected to be reduced by 20% in 2020. And in Turkey, the effect on coal in particular is due to Turkey, which use coal the most for gas for power generation. Oil and electricity demand for tourism as well is expected to be reduced strongly. Overall, oil for transport is expected to be hit severely, with renewables are set to increase. Now, when we look at the impact by region, very briefly, what we can see here is that the South Mediterranean is hit relatively lower than the North Mediterranean countries. So the energy demand decrease, the 6.4% average, is split between the north and the south differently. So the energy demand would decrease by 0.4% for the north and 5% for the south. Of course, this will lead to reduction of CO2 emissions related to the energy sector as well for the year. And this is good news from the climate change point of view, but we know that this is only by chance news, so that doesn't mean a lot neither. So 7% average and 6% for the South Med and 9% for the North Mediterranean countries. Now, let us have a look to the renewables. So as I said in the beginning, the Mediterranean region is endowed with huge potential for renewable energy and energy efficiency. The region, almost all the countries have set targets for 2020, for 2030, and European ones as well, of course. I'm sure you already heard that this region is attracting the most competitive bids at world, should it be in the North, South Mediterranean countries or MENA countries. And we've been hearing even recent good news, including during this COVID period. However, actually at the present situation, renewables represent 25% of total electricity capacity in the region. So in 2018, the total electricity capacity reached 220 gigawatts in the South and East Mediterranean countries. And 16% of this 16% of the total, but above the 25%, 16% is hydro, 4% wind, 4% solar, and other 1%. So this is how the 25% is split. So excluding hydrocarbons, wind, solar, and other represent 5% of the total electricity installed capacity in South and East. So it looks like it is not that important, but when we look at the additional capacity during the last decade, we see that whereas natural gas is ranked first in terms of cumulative capacity installed, solar, however, is the fastest growing among the top 5, with more than 5 times increase over the period of the last decade. As I said, all the countries have set ambitious targets for 2020-2030 horizons, and which they have confirmed in their national determined contribution as a solution to contribute to reach the targets of the Paris Agreement. When we calculate what would these objectives mean, in our analysis, we said that we see that the net capacity additions that will be required by the announced national targets sum up to, including non-hydro capacity, 216 gigawatt compared to 2011 levels. So, which means that 18 gigawatt so far we have 18 gigawatt that are under different phases. So 18 out of these 116, which shows that we have a lot to do in order to reach these targets. The good news, again, as I said, is that the region is attractive. So what would be the key considerations now for renewables before and following and for this time being of COVID context and what in the future? We are contemplating current shortage in electricity demand due to the lockdown, which are coupled with priority of dispatch and low operating costs, explain why we see that all energies have been reduced, but renewables is positive. So we see with COVID a sort of greening of the electricity mix with much larger share of renewables compared to average. So this is the first, I would say, short-term impact of the COVID. However, the renewable market is not immune to COVID crisis. So it is false good news, I would say. What we see from the announcement, from what is going on, is that for large-scale projects, we are not that much afraid and they should not be hit severely. Financing is already granted. The risk looks like much more of delay. So these projects may suffer of delay, but they are not really at risk. But what is from my point of view, much of concern is the smaller scale project, because these projects are those who are much more close to the consumers, much more sustainable for the sustainable development of, I would say, and for the social impact. And these projects are likely to suffer the hardest impact. So this needs very much attention and for sure much support, and we need to be very careful. Regarding new capacity, some Mediterranean countries have already confirmed that they will stick to the planned auction schedule, but some others are saying they will postpone. So how will this impact the progress of renewables in the region? For sure, there will be an impact for the short term, but we expect a sort of rebound in 2021. We are hearing from the Commission very clearly that they will keep on pushing and will not cut back on the Green Deal work plan and timelines. We've been hearing as well from many companies, as well as the willingness to push for more green energy, sustainable development, etc. Our analysis, as I said, and from the study I showed a graph earlier, we see that we are not on track to reach the 2020 targets. So we have the European countries, South Med and North Med targets, and we are not on track. But we are progressing well towards a longer term target. So we are more optimistic that the countries, and this was before, just before the COVID, we issued this study in March, by the way, just before the COVID. And the conclusion is that we won't reach the 2020, but we are in good track for the 2030. Now, the COVID might have two double effects, or encourage to speed up and to reach this target, or to impact this picture and to worsen the situation. So more than being a barrier itself, it might sharpen existing problems in several countries, because the reason why we are not going to reach the 2020 target is before we have still a lot of barriers. Access to finance, long-term commitment, administrative procedures. These are what were there just before COVID, and these are the issues that we need to tackle if we would like to reach our targets, and we could even meet more ambitions. So that's very briefly, very quickly, a tour de table, and I wanted to leave you with, as you introduced very well, Rim, the different topics that we will discuss later on. And from my point of view, of course, macroeconomic aspects are of very, very high importance that we will discuss later on. We need to work on both short-term very quickly, rapidly, and to prepare the future. And for the short-term answer and no regret answer, of course, we need to speed up energy efficiency and a green energies deployment in the Mediterranean region. We have no choice than doing this for many reasons, climate change, social impacts, whatever. But of course, we need to work on invest in the medium and long-term future on all what we know, but of course on innovation, and innovation is really a key. Last but not least, international and regional cooperation. And here again, more than ever, because there is a fear that we close, like the lockdown. Everybody was afraid about even his son. You have it, I don't have it. We protect each other from each other. We need to work together hand in hand in order to force fate, in order to reach what we're sure is very important, but we have a lot of barriers in order to reach, and a lot of priorities. So for that, energy diplomacy is very important and plays a crucial role for granting stability and sustainable growth in the MENA region, for sure. We are this year celebrating the 25th anniversary of the Barcelona process, so it's an opportunity to reboost the Euro-Mediterranean cooperation, and we have to build it in the line of the Paris Agreement, of course, for renewables, for energy efficiency, for sustainable energy, but also not losing in mind that we need to prepare the future and innovate ourselves. A lot remains to do, and especially in the integration of the regional integration, and that is why regional cooperation is very important. So this is of high importance to me. We've been there in 1995 to say to the Commission and to the Barcelona process, please keep an eye on energy, because energy is very important for the future of the region. We are still here, and we are very glad to work hand in hand with your European Commission and Union for the Mediterranean and all partners in order to hopefully reach the common goal of an effective energy transition and the best possible sustainable energy future of the region in compliance with the Paris Agreement. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much, Houda. This is very comprehensive and very clear, but one thing I must say that uncertainty will continue on putting further pressure on the demand for energy overall. We do not know when this is going to be over, so it's a little bit complicated to assess and to forecast where are we going with these developments. I have one question before we move to the second introduction is, how do you explain the sharp decline of the demand for nuclear within the Mediterranean region? So is it because it has been compensated to a certain extent by renewable, or there is kind of a shift already that we can see, and this will continue? This is something which, a question probably that if you want to answer now, otherwise we can leave it for later.
Yeah, so it is, again, all what is happening now is an exception. So there is no lessons to be learned for the scenarios for the future. We are contemplating a sudden situation, and the nuclear part is due to the reduction of electricity demand. And so when you sum the different effects of the reduction of the demand, so this is what you see for the different mix, but as electricity demand has reduced a lot, and as I said, 20% of the demand on the nuclear for France, that explains the situation. But I won't dare to say that it's going to continue. It is absolutely an exceptional situation in 29, what could happen in 2020, because of course for the first period, these are calculations of almost real, but then you make an estimation of the possibility of the comeback and how can the energy demand could restart more or less. So as you said, we are facing a lot of uncertainties, so that these are an estimation of what would happen. What we know so far is for instance, in Morocco, in Tunisia, due to the lockdown, we know that we have reduced the electricity demand by 10%. This is a reality. Then when we look at what could be the impact by 2020 in comparison with 2019, that would be a possible option, but that doesn't mean that this is what will happen. But already, yes, in the same period, in 3 months, in comparison with the same period in 2019, the electricity demand has reduced by more than 10% in several countries.
Okay, thank you very much. Let's move to the second introduction, which is on the macroeconomic impacts for fossil energy importing countries in the MENA. And Raja, the floor is yours.
Thanks, Reem. And thanks actually for preparing and organizing this important sessions and bringing such an excellent panelists. Now I'm learning from them. Houda, thank you. You prepared the ground for me to move directly to the macro, so no need for me to speak about oil market. Basically, what I will focus on in this presentation, how the oil market affecting the region. Of course, we have exporters and importers among the regions, but it looks like they're affecting both of them in maybe the same directions and somehow. The region have been hit by the pandemic like any other region in the globe. So no one, as Reem said, been able to avoid this negative impact. what you saw in the screen, this is what the IMF forecast about region growth, -3 to 7. I think -3 in some of the oil-producing country, -7 or -8 to Sudan and some other countries. Although I might think it might be worse than what the IMF FN said. Basically, the region hit with this pandemic as at a region in two ways, one in the demand side and one in the supply side. And as the economy of the region and most of the countries in MENA, it heavily depends on the government spending, and the government is the main player on the economy. Given the role of the government, then let's focus on how this will affect the government. And once we have this, the measure have been taken to avoid the spread of the coronavirus, this is affecting the supply side, and so most of companies and businesses will not be able to do the jobs. And as Houda mentioned, most of the country either used complete lockdown or partial lockdown. So both of them have a big impact. And we've seen it in different countries. And this is why I expected the impact maybe a little bit bigger than what the IMF expected. There's also a big talk about W recession. So we might get a little bit out of this recessions and might back again. So there is a lot of discussions about this issue and how it will impact us. So let me now just focus once the oil market affected, as Houda mentioned, and it's received a big hit and the price of oil declined. And as we know, in most oil producing countries, the price of oil they need to balance their budget between 50 to 80. So 50 or a little bit less, a little bit than, or about 50, this is Kuwait, 80 or 83, this is Saudi Arabia. So we find we need a higher oil price to balance the budget. If not, then there will be huge debt carried by these countries. And with the social distance and measure have been taken in these countries, then the government need to spend more. And as several of these countries announced, they will increase their deficit this year. So will be around maybe 15 to 20% of the GDP. So the situation now in the whole region, deficit will increase, debt also high, which is average debt in most of MENA region above 50. So I mean, medium, average is 50. So we find some country below 40 and some country above the 60. So we are in this average. Most of the oil country below 40, around this one, except maybe Bahrain. Bahrain, it's exceptional in this regard. So the debt is high, and deficit this year will be high because they need to interfere. Given their impact on the oil producing, do we think the oil importers will benefit from the decline of oil? Actually, for the MENA region, although they will save some of the budget, but in reality, it actually will have a negative impact on them. And several studies, they found there is a link between oil exporter and oil importer in our regions. And the link came through this four ways: tourism, FDI, and remittance, and government aid. And government aid taking two parts. One, directly through budget or financing budget from the oil producers to oil importers. And the second, through development funds being established by several of the oil producers, where they try to support and include the Arab countries. So this kind of four channels, this is link the region and make the oil really important for all of them, even for the oil importers, because with these three channels is overweighted the benefit. They benefit from reducing the oil price, as most of them actually, they are not heavy use or not heavy industry that using oil, so they will not save much on in their industries. So just mostly it's for consumptions and saving the bill and subsidies from the government side. But when it comes to the growth or the impact on the growth, it's a small impact. But the impact they received from the FDI and tourism and remittance and government aid from oil producers is overweighted this negativity or positive, depends on the oil price increase or decrease. And if we can see here, the migrant remittance outflows from GCC, we notice with the oil price increase, it's increased dramatically. So we saw it now here more than triple or even more in the last 10 years compared to the 90s and the 80s. And the major outflow coming from Saudi Arabia and UAE lately. Saudi Arabia was dominant for a few years. Now UAE also becoming important as a remittance. And if we saw it as a part of their GDP, we note, for example, how the remittance outflow as a percentage of the GDP of the country that's sending or outflow from these countries. So we find in Bahrain, it's 8.7% of the GDP. In Kuwait is a little bit above 10%. Oman is a little bit above 12%. Saudi Arabia around 4.3%. UAE around 10.9%, 6%. So we saw it's a really significant percentage of their GDP sent outside, and this is because the labor force, the local labor force, is small compared to the expats who work in these countries. For example, in Saudi Arabia, 60% of labor force in private sector is expats. In UAE, it's more than maybe 80 to 85%. Also in Qatar, around this percentage, I think it's even a little bit higher, as in 90%. Bahrain is a little bit less, so it's around maybe 50 to 60%. Kuwait also a little bit around 70%. So we know it's really a significant percentage of the labor force. So once they have capital flow coming as a result of the oil increased prices and the government spend more on constructions and services, as we know, then in these countries on bringing more labor to help to produce the quality of work needed. But the problem, most of labor force coming to these countries and the demand on unskilled labor, so around 60% or 55% in most of the labor coming from outside, or expats labor coming to the GCC, in reality they are unskilled labor. And this is because of the government spending and the focus on constructions and services that not in need to bring high skilled labor. Now with the diversification need, it's might a little bit shift, but I don't know if this will happen or not, because the macro stability is not as expected to prove in the ability to achieve the diversification objective these most countries focusing on. So if we look at it also from we notice now the biggest country received is Egypt. Egypt is this one, and the rest is a significant percentage of their GDP actually coming from remittance. And some studies, if you notice that remittance is stable when it's come to a flow to a country compared to FDI or government aid. Because with the remittance, with the change of most of the economy happens, most of the time they are stable. As people who are working outside, they try to send money back home, helping their families. It's more stable than any other source of income coming out from outside. So we notice, for example, in Egypt is around 9% of their GDP. In Jordan is 10%. Morocco is 5.6%, and Morocco and Tunisia is mostly from Europe, more than GCC actually. Most of the labor in these countries, they are actually on European country. Is just a small percentage of them which is neglected in work in GCC countries. But the link Morocco and Tunisia with the GCC coming through government aids, tourism, and some of the FDI. You know, it's also in Sudan is 1.4%. Syria is not mentioned. Tunisia is around 5%. West Bank and Gaza is around 16%. Yemen is around 13%. Lebanon is around 13%. So we know it's really a significant percentage of the GDP coming from outside. And this has the same impact as the oil revenue coming to the GCC countries, because this will affect the exchange rate, affect the balance of payment, affecting the demand inside. So all this impact we notice also affecting the growth in this country as a result of these fluctuations. So if we now for 1 year, we find, for example, Saudi Arabia sending more to Egypt, more than $7 billion. Also sending to, I put also non-Arab countries here to see some of this also remittance where it's also going. So Saudi Arabia and UAE sending more actually to Arab country. Maybe UAE less compared to Saudi Arabia, and most of its maybe spending went outside to India, Philippines, and some other countries. When it's come to the total, which is came out, for example, in 2018, Saudi Arabia is 41 billion, UAE around 29 billion, Oman 8 billion, Kuwait 4, Qatar, Kuwait 10, and Bahrain 2. It is a significant amount of money sent outside, which helping the region. So this is why we saw there is a big link. And when the big drop happened in the oil market and in the oil prices, and oil producers became more in a debt and deficit to their GDP increase, as we noticed now. With the situation now and the measure have been taken to lock down the economy, they need to send some of the labor force expats who come from outside back homes. And this is have also a permanent impact in the future. And what I'm worried about is this will shift the supply curve to left and demand curve down. So we're searching to lower new equilibrium in the region, first in producing country, and it will have impact also through remittance and foreign aid and tourism to the rest of the country. Of course, these countries also oil importers, they will face the same problem, but it's from the and the shift of supply curve left. And as they bring also, as also labor or expats who work in the GCC country who came back, or maybe for North Africa coming from Europe, or stop sending some of the money with the situations as the deficit really increased and the growth declined to more than 7 or 8%, then we expected this will have also a negative impact on the demand, as some of these families who depends on remittance received from their relevant outside, they will not be able to spend inside. So we'll start to have the impact on site, and this will have a negativity on the whole region coming from the oil market significantly, and also from measures have been taken to stop the spread of coronavirus on the supply side. And this is an exceptional case, as some also might affecting the capital flow to the region. And also for existing businesses, they might be in bankruptcy and get completely out of the business, and they will not be able to continue staying in the lockdown, waiting for another cycle or to the open to habits. And if we put on top of that in our region, as most of these countries, they know that the growth of the region and the growth of most of also oil exporters coming from the oil, and as the forecast of the oil for the rest of 2020 and maybe 2021 is not that high, then government also start to announce measures to reduce their spending. And also in some of these countries, which was surprisingly, they also introduced some new measures to increase their revenues through taxes or fees. This will have a bigger impact on the economy. And the signal for sector, it will be difficult for them to continue. And this might encourage some of them to get out of business now instead of later on to save some of their wealth that's still in their hand, or to at least to reduce the damage they received. And once they get out of business, either in oil producers and also in oil exporters, then oil importer, then we will shifting the economy a little bit down. And once we open the lockdown again, it will be difficult to bring it back again to the way it used to be. the economy, or at least near to. So the big drop will be a little bit huge, and the new growth will be much below what we expected and the line we used to be on before the pandemic. Of course, most of the country now, what they want and expected, hopefully, to have a few recessions and get back very quick near the trend line. But I think for our region, it's not a few recessions. It's look like a little bit bigger U, and it will be a severe recessions and will be much below the trend line. And I hope I'm wrong in this one. Hope things will improve and we'll see the positive impact later on. Thank you. Back to you, Reem.
Thank you, Raja. This is very interesting, actually, that you made the link between the situation in the oil markets for exporting and importing countries and the remittances. I think this is extremely clear that I'm not sure we're heading into a V recovery, but probably, as many are thinking, we're heading into either a U recovery or a W recovery, which is even much more complicated for the MENA region. Now, when I listen to you and I listen to Houda, I think we probably are more uncertainty, also more uncertainty with the fundamentals, macroeconomic fundamentals. There might be severe issues on unemployment as well, in terms of unemployment for the MENA region. And clearly for me, this is going to be a dramatic impact on this region. So hold on this. We can discuss it later about the potential implications and forecasts. What are the probably the solutions for it, if there are any. I would like to move right away to the third introduction by Radia, who will delve into more the vulnerability of the energy systems, and then, in fact, to see how they can support the socio-economic development for the MENA region. Radia, the floor is yours.
Very much. First, thanks for giving me the possibility to take part of this webinar. Thanks to the Euro-Mediterranean Network and the Euro-Mediterranean Association. Given that my speech will follow Houda and Raja, who put the floor and, let's say, set the context in terms of global, I would say, geopolitics and mainly the latest development. For me, I will start from the title that you gave to this webinar when you asked about the blessing or curse. I think none of them is applicable in the context of a situation that none of us predicted, and globally it cannot have any positive impact, whether from oil and gas producers or consumers, and all become vulnerable to that. That's why my talk basically will focus on the vulnerability of the energy system to support the socio-economic development. And I will touch upon the portfolio of the Arab region, which is part of my work, but also the MENA in general, where I include Iran, given that that we share similar similarities when it comes to vulnerability. First, actually, the term vulnerability, it's much more convenient when we talk about the MENA region than when we speak about security, because vulnerability is really touches all the elements that we are in such situation and where basically we cannot somehow address the challenges that we face, not only the COVID-19, but also the fluctuation of the oil prices. To start with, I mean, the business as usual, certainly in the MENA region, is not anymore sustainable. This we have seen it even since the last 2 decades. There are certain positive signs of development, but not on the right business model usually used. Why? Because within the region, we do have, obviously, a rapidly enlarged inject demand. There is unsustainable production and consumption. We see it not only in the GCC, but across the different countries in the Arab region, and obviously in the MENA region. But most importantly, is the high dependence on fossil fuels, not only as a source of revenues for at least most of them, but more importantly also as a source of demand. And the region, it's the most dominant in terms of fossil fuels compared to the global average. This is also linked to certain aspects that we may not look at it very carefully. It's basically the deficiency in terms of enforcement of regulations and policies. Previous speaker, especially Houda, she mentioned that there are policies and targets put in place in the portfolio of for example, the MENA countries as an example. But however, if you will see the achievement versus how these policies are enforced, specifically when it comes to the energy efficiency, for example, then we see that we are behind the schedule. And for this, I put the framework of the 2030 agenda mostly because I believe that whatever we speak about the Paris Agreement, the climate actions, it's within this. So basically, as long as the countries endorse that, then this should be the startup and the business case to start with. But why we also have this situation? Because also within the country, within the countries of this region, we do have still an issue in order to develop different economic sectors. Most of them, they have not qualitative, I would say, in terms of transport facilities, specifically the public infrastructure are not there. And we may think that this is not as a priority. It showed even with the crisis that the transportation sector is extremely important, and we should think about the e-mobility as well. With that, there are other aspects also that we may miss as well, is the lack of awareness in environment conservation in terms of the energy conservation. This is beyond when we speak just about energy efficiency. Why? Because we put policies and regulations, we try to implement them, but we don't follow a multi-stakeholder engagement where we have the different actors and in the context of the national context that should support in that sense, but they are not there in order to help, specifically to list the civil society. And the other important element also that the MENA region is a little bit homogeneous. It's not just oil and gas producers and consumers. It's also the rural-urban divide. So still within the region, we have 30 million people who do not have access to electricity. Some of them lost the affordable electricity and they are somehow not reliable, including the country where I'm based here in Lebanon. But most of the elements are also due to the conflict and instability. These are factors which are heavily, I would say, uncertainty driven. And then basically we cannot do anything from the energy perspective. This also impacts the access to finance, access to technology innovation, and the quality, so let's say the adequate capacity are needed. So that's why from my perspective, it's talking about the energy vulnerability that support and ensure that we have a sustainable future beyond just looking to the market dynamics. And that's why there is another aspect. Sometimes people confuse when we talk about the MENA region and confuse it with other Western regions. It's completely a different perspective. And honestly speaking, when I used to work in the oil and gas at the global level, I never look at these factors. And it's come when I did on the UN that I looked how these are impacting heavily the way policies, including the one in the energy, are heavily and somehow impacted by this context. It just to list, to list view. You are in a region, the most scarce region in the world. If you take the 30 ranked globally, 13 of them are from the region. Land degradation, desertification, and more importantly, the food insecurity. And we have seen this impact with the COVID-19 impact. The other elements that's linked to the biodiversity, the increase in air pollution that we are not perfectly addressing specifically. And in addition, what I indicated as conflict, the instability, and we understand also the high level of remittance because you do have several mass of migrations and people looking for other job opportunities when it's not available in their home country. The other element also that needs to be bear in mind that we may think also that the homogeneity of the region, but we still have people who do not have access to health facilities, and the diagnosis of COVID-19 in certain places, actually they are not accurate in terms of data because we do not know if they have really the universal access to electricity, and which lead, obviously, they do not have access to have facilities. So the vulnerability in this sense is not just looking to the sustainability, but how really we are able now, it's not the horizon 2030 or 2050, the future generation who started, which are the young today, and we need to build the future in the near future, 2030, just 10 years from now, is how they can contribute and how we can support to ensure that we have the universal access, but also the affordability and the modern energy. With that, just I put this slide as a snapshot to show that if you take the water scarcity globally, all what you see in the red color is the region what we speak about. So the water scarcity is a major concern before anything else. And the water scarcity is impacting the way we deal with energy and can explain actually the dependence on the oil and gas resources specifically for water development. So let me just give also some very good news as well and good progress within the region. I'm involved in the within the UN system where we developed the SDG 7 tracking report for the region. And basically, if we take it from the 23rd agenda perspective, none of the region globally is on track on the SDG 7 because you talk about clean, modern, available and reliable source of energy. But however, the bright spot within the region is how we performed compared to the global average in terms of electricity and clean cooking. And this thanks also to the business model that we use, which is basically based on natural gas. So we are talking about almost 94% in terms of electricity within the region, and only 30 million who do not have access to electricity. 50% of that is in rural context. And more importantly, that we see even those who used to have deficit, like Morocco, for example, they did a tremendous work during the last 5 years, I'd say. In terms of clean cooking, and this mostly in the region, still a little bit subsidized because it's liquefied petroleum gas mostly, but at least we are above the average with almost 92%. And still a little bit behind compared to electricity because there is still a challenge in terms of this subsidizing clean cooking, moving to much more application of renewable energy in terms of cooking, which still the technologies, the availability and affordability, not always the case when you speak about large scale and small scale projects. Now where we need to work, and it was a little bit highlighted by the speaker for the region of the Mediterranean. Within the MENA region, we have two factors where before starting about renewable energy, I believe energy efficiency, given the business model that we have, is a must as number one. Because it's not about question energy conservation, it's about how you innovate through all your process, how you make the best use and increase your productivity. So globally, when you look at the average, you think you are the second lowest energy intensive. But actually, because as highlighted by Radia, we do not have a real heavy industry, except in the oil and gas producing countries, it's based on oil and gas. But still, this doesn't explain the range of energy intensity. And basically, the only progress that was made, specifically from oil and gas producers, in the last 2 years, and we see it in the GCC, and I should recognize the effort that done by the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia in this respect. So the business model they are following, which is heavily innovative as well, plus the reforming of the energy prices. Within the region, the major sectors that we need to work on, and it's really integrated. You just not look at the building sector. This is certainly you are talking about electricity. Involving renewables would not solve the full problem because you will have a problem of infrastructure and inefficiency. Then basically the transport sector is a priority, because it will lead to the economic development. But more importantly, given that we do have all the challenges in terms of water scarcity and so on, the agriculture is a major concern and it needs much more work. In addition, as number one is the building sector. In terms of renewables, certainly as the Mediterranean renewable energy in the MENA region is endowed with plenty of resources, and after oil and gas, we should be happy that we do have other kind of resources. But provided that we rely on the modern one in terms of solar and wind, this would ensure that we are really speaking about clean energy. So far, the average with including Iran is around 8%. 80% of it is residential. Most of it's traditional, and only 19% which is related to solar and wind. Certainly, I'm talking about the contribution in terms of final energy consumption, but not about the capacities. I believe the contribution is extremely important because this will lead how the different fuels are competing, specifically renewables versus natural gas in the region. I'm not going to actually give how the impact was in the region, but I just want to mention, to add some two elements to what already Radia indicated. where within the MENA region, it's still not fully captured, not because of the oil prices. That's something that we live with, and it will be adjusted provided that COVID-19 impact will hopefully will finish soon. But there is one important element that in this region, part of the world, that you do have the element that they indicated in terms of what we see in terms of impact, the increase in need of water. I give an example of Jordan, for example, where it has 30% of its water increase and during the crisis due to different aspects, as you know, and 15% of the electricity they have, it's using, it's for water generation. If I take the GCC and including also Algeria, you see that 30% of the electricity is generated through desalination. And desalination now, even they are doing a tremendous effort in terms of efficiency, but still work needs to be done in order to have it much more by using renewable energy. And they need to have it because there is no other way to do it. More importantly, that both electricity and water are still subsidized, and a lot of work that have been done, but still far away to achieve its result. But if we talk about reforming electricity prices, actually there is another impact that we have seen in the region with COVID-19. If I take Jordan, Moroccan, and Tunisian, for example, they pay 20 times what the Kuwaiti pay for the same bill of electricity. Why? Because the reform of electricity prices is not only impacting the lowest income, but also the middle income. So whatever mechanism, economic model that we need to implement, we need to bear in mind that we don't really leave anyone behind. It means that the structure of the reforms, and this is also a voice for all the stimulus packages that were presented by policymakers, they need really well include this aspect, and which would have an impact in the future, without listing the issues of conflicts, what we have seen in Palestine, for example, and how this impacted, given that how much electricity they are getting at the international prices. But in addition to, I think there is another aspect that was mentioned by Radia in terms of remittances. What we have seen for no oil and gas producers and exporters, but there is an aspect that no one can control in terms of dependence on tourism. Certainly, the issue that if you take Egypt and Tunisia and Morocco, specifically, I mean, Egypt, they at least have the transit through Canal Suez, where basically it's increased additional revenues when the oil spread from there. But what I want to say that technically speaking, it shows that all the economies are vulnerable because they rely on specific sector and they do not have a diversified economies. The other element that was mentioned in terms of renewables, there are certain who announce certain delay actually in the MENA region in terms of construction, not in terms of tendering. And we were happy to see that, I mean, Houda mentioned certain figures in the Mediterranean, including Morocco, but actually the highest, and let's say the prominent results that we get are in GCC. The lowest, we just had it 2 weeks ago in the United Arab Emirates, and followed the week before it was in Qatar, and before that it was the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia. This gives really a potential that the business model they're applying, specifically based on auctions, is really giving a good result and would impact also their economy. So now let me give also the negative point that I have seen that Radia didn't a little bit address. And this was in somehow looking at from oil and gas producers. Actually, we keep presenting how we perform in terms of fiscal balance, and the fiscal deficit from year to year, starting from 2014, we see how some have taken from, they didn't have enough buffer from the reserves they have. But actually, if just we see the chart that I've taken from and compiled with the help of my colleague from Oxford Energy Studies, based on the IMF actually outlook that was recently released, we see the fiscal deficits increasing in all of them. And in addition, we see the external debt that is also increasing, like in the case of Oman, the case of Bahrain, for example. This would not really support the transition and would not support the economy development. There is another aspect also that even the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia, where we thought that they would certainly perform better. But recently, the Minister of Finance said that whatever reforms and stimulus package we will involve, it will be really painful. And he asked also the support of the society with that. So this not only linked to the oil price decline, but actually it's linked to we don't know when and how the impact of COVID will take place and somehow. But for me, when we present, we say the future is for renewable energy efficiency. Certainly, they are part of the equation. But the sustainable future depends on the way you see it and which horizon you speak about. And certainly for the MENA region, we are and we still depend on the fossil fuels and in different ways, whether oil producers and consumers. But we cannot ignore that these resources given by God, they would represent and continue to represent a major share in terms of oil and gas revenues and a major contributor to the economy, but provided the way we use it. And I just display in this chart in order to show just improving reserves, how the region will continue to represent a real contributor in the fundamental markets, specifically led by the OPEC and provided that the OPEC plus also the others follow. But the OPEC is playing a major role, led by the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia, given the capacity and spare capacity they have. And even though the agreement was done and was called in April, but we don't see the impact because we don't know how much the COVID-19 will take much more time. But more importantly, that we know that an average price acceptable to the marginal cost of supply would allow to give certain buffer to these economies. But we cannot do that if we don't manage our market before anything else. This is a message for all the countries within the region. And I displayed in this graph how really it's more than double energy consumption that cannot justify by any business model. I just display how the infrastructure that we have in a heavy industry, which is not really modernized, but more importantly in the style of a business model. I don't want to show the Emirates, but I just want to show an example of that, and inadequate infrastructure. With that, certainly renewable energy is the next and still, and it's prominent for the region with plenty of resources, not only in terms of solar wind as displayed in my chart, but obviously in terms also of the human resources that you just need to give them. It's not because renewable energy is a driver of economic development. Actually, this is maybe a message that needs to be also corrected because now we are thinking about driving different economies and trying to take advantage of all the possibilities and opportunities. And because the social business model is changing, and that's why we need to take advantage of all different sources. And with that, allow me also, I'm honored to be part also of the working group under the leadership of the CAPSAC and the T20, while contributing to the policy briefs for the G20. And the innovative way that the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia adopted this year is the 4R, based on reduce, reuse, recycle, and remove. What that means? That certainly addressing the climate concern and actions, and all the countries in the MENA region already showed their commitment to that. But we cannot obviously move to completely transform the energy system without having a smooth transition. And the transition specifically with the economic recovery after the COVID-19 showed the added value of looking more carefully to the carbon management, not only in terms of addressing carbon, because the region is not the most responsible of these emissions and actually are not gaining from that, but basically on the best use of these resources through using energy efficiency, renewable energy, and innovative technologies, reusing that through the chemical conversions that we can have in petrochemical in the whole value chain, whether in the heavy industries and others, and also for recycling. And we have seen that not only in the industries, but also we have seen that in the agriculture and food processing. But it goes without saying that the last 4R, which is related to removing the carbon through the carbon capture, storage, and utilization, is extremely important. So I just Taking that with authorization with my colleague, adapted from the papers that was recently published, and hopefully this, with the policy recommendation that come up with the G20, will give room to much more collaboration, not only at the regional, but also at the global, and will certainly create jobs across the value chain. And this cannot be done if we just say things and without applying them. What we have seen across the process that we've been working with our countries, specifically on the voluntary national review, they do each year the high-level political forum, is that there is a lack of coordination between the national planning, the strategies, the implementation, and the institutional framework. So this graph is just to show that it's need better coordination first when you establish the mechanism. Then if you want to unlock the financing, if you want really to have an impact on your society, it needs to be integrated, including the health, including the gender, including the social benefit, and all of that cannot be done if we don't really follow the framework of the SDGs in integrated approach. With that, you need to ensure that you build the capacity of the institutions and those who implement that. Allow me, I'm sorry I've taken time, but allow me to finish with 3 key pillars of work that are integrated and complemented in a way that sustainable energy systems need to be inclusive. This is how I presented in a publication of the vulnerability 3 years ago, when I was telling that the sustainable energy system in our societies is not resilient, is not sustainable, not because of what we have today, because we don't know how to integrate the way of thinking, because we don't work here with each other, other national, sub-regional, regional, and global. And to finish, so basically we think about the energy demand management as in order to decouple the energy consumption from the economy in the way that reforms should be well done and mitigation action should be there. And we should ensure that we have enforcement of policies in terms of the energy efficiency and standards, work on the infrastructure, and more importantly, build the capacity, ensure good governance, transparency, and accountability, and monitor the way we put policy and correct actions if needed. And hopefully the situation today help policymakers to review that. When we speak about the second pillar, which is diversifying, not only in terms of energy mix, it's certainly in terms of how and what energy you use. It's not just a question of renewable energy, it's the way clean energy, independently each how they define it. Some may include natural gas, but more importantly, you diversify your energy supply and you make much more value of your carbon as also another source of increase in your supply. You look at the off-grid solutions as indicated, decentralization, digitalization, that work also with innovation, and enhance the interregional market that unfortunately didn't exist for oil and gas, and very limited, it should exist for electricity. And to finish, in a region where we do have really the lowest energy productivity, certainly it's need to upscale the energy efficiency across economic sectors. And when we think about somehow making economic diversification, today it's much more a priority driven that needs to be there, and look at what sectors we have a competitive advantage and niche market. And this goes without saying that this is from demand side and supply side in terms of management of that. And obviously, this cannot be done if we do not have, and we still believe that we work at large scale, and specifically I'm saying from the oil and gas producers, it should much more include the private sector. It's room today to give them much more possibility to be involved and to work with the research institution more closely, specifically the universities, and give room for innovation to the young students, those who have very innovative ideas, but we are still not linking the energy industry with those who are working and studying on that. I think this, the point of view in terms of look, it's much more inclusive. That's not because we do have the COVID-19, you think about it, it's just an eye-opener to confirm once again that we have a vulnerable system to support our social economic development. Thank you.
Thank you, Radia. Very, very comprehensive presentation, very interesting. Thank you for making the point on the great potential that we can still see in the region for renewable and energy efficiency, but also thank you for mentioning the circular economy and the prospects for it. I think this is extremely important to as a pillar for recovery post, hopefully, COVID-19. And I understand that we are not yet out from the dependence from fossil fuel energy sources. However, I still believe that the low prices might have an implication if they are continuing for the next 3 to 4 years down the road. Now, without further ado, I would like to ask Ahmed to discuss these 3 introductions, and then we move into the few questions that we have from the participants. Please, Ahmed, the floor is yours.
Yureen, thank you, fellow panelists, for your presentations. First of all, I'd like to thank the Euro-Mediterranean Economists Association for their kind invitation and commend their diligent endeavors of developing a network of excellence among economists dedicated to fostering socio-economic development and political development across the region. Particularly taking note of their latest work on the COVID-19 policy response. Before I start, it seems that 2 international holidays are upon us, the Ascension Day and Eid al-Fitr, and I wish you all the best on the occasion of those blessed holidays, whether you celebrate it or not. And one of the nice things about being a discussant is that I don't have to prepare slides. Instead, I'll have to make do with discussing the work that has been done by such a leading group of experts in their respective fields, which, to be honest, is a challenging job as it is, in a sense that it covers, a lot has been covered today, and also that we're dealing with a situation that is unprecedented, and there is a lot of uncertainty, and let's face it, the dust has not yet settled. But without further ado, I will start now. For those of you who are not aware, the UFM, I work for the UFM, I represent the Energy and Climate Action Division. My portfolio is the energy. The UFM has been established in 2008 through the Paris Declaration, and the membership includes 43 member states, 20 EU members, and 15 southern and eastern partner countries. The UFM Secretariat Action focuses primarily on 6 sectors: energy and climate action, water, environment, and blue economy, business development and employment, research and higher education, urban development and transport, and finally, social and civil affairs. Energy featured predominantly in the Paris Declaration, highlighting the keen interests of member states to develop a tangible energy cooperation through joint action and work. In many ways, the UFM energy portfolio is a result of a long and accumulative experience that fostered a structured policy cooperation approach, focusing on a multi-stakeholders engagement. Such approach came to materialize through the establishment of the 3 UFM energy platforms in 2015, that together with various UFM Secretariat activities and partner activities, steer Euro-Mediterranean energy cooperation through the generous support of the European Commission and under the guidance of the UFM co-presidency. The 3 UFM energy platforms are the UFM Renewable Energy and Energy Efficiency, which focuses on accelerating the deployment of renewable energy and energy efficiency measures across the region. The UFM Regional Electricity Market Platform, which assists in developing interconnections and electricity exchanges. And the UFM Gas Platform, which seeks to enhance the cooperation in Euromed region between among all stakeholders of the gas value chain. The UFM platforms bring together partners and stakeholders who are highly engaged in the energy cooperation in the Euro-Mediterranean region, including RECRI, MEDENER, MEDREG, MEDTESO, and OME, among others. Through our cooperation with our partners, the 3 platforms work in full harmony towards establishing sustainable energy transition in the Euro-Mediterranean region. The work of the platforms and the work of the partners and stakeholders expands from providing a space for energy policy dialogue and promoting investments for sustainable energy solutions to harmonizing regulations and developing roadmaps for interconnections and working with local authorities, believing in the importance of adopting a bottom-up approach to complement our political framework of cooperation. The COVID-19 situation has posed many challenges to several institutions, without a doubt. And the UFM is not an exception. we have been working towards developing a comprehensive approach, a strategic approach towards tackling the economic recovery efforts and working towards ensuring speedy recovery. And this is through a comprehensive strategy that focuses on the socio-economic benefits of renewable energy and energy efficiency and their ability in promoting jobs and creating jobs. This strategy is being developed in a comprehensive manner, as I said, in cooperation with the UFM co-presidency and member states, and is consistent with the EU Green Deal. The current situation and collapse of oil prices is definitely an important topic, and that's the main theme for this webinar. But it is important to distinguish also between the indicative price signals in the market and price signals that are related to mechanisms such as future contracts. And this makes the forecast and prediction quite complicated, to be honest. As usual, this will have the collapse in oil prices will have different impacts on oil importing and oil exporting countries, as Raja mentioned in his presentation. But as far as the oil exporting countries, the collapse in oil prices always works as a constant reminder of the importance of diversifying the economy and relying on different aspects to further development. And we can see this, despite there are several strategies among oil exporting countries, we can still see extremely high reliance on oil to fund the budgets, which can be seen in the fiscal break-even price for oil among different countries, which varies considerably, but is still generally high. I have to say, in my opinion, I don't think that the collapse of oil prices will automatically trigger sustainable energy transitions like the public opinion sees it, and it will take a lot of work for this to happen. And when an economic reboot eventually occurs, and as Houda mentioned, there will be a rebound effect. And that rebound effect might surpass, the effects of it might surpass what we have seen during this period, and especially what we have seen in terms of the greenhouse gas emissions. So I believe it all depends on how we manage the transition and how we integrate green recovery in efforts to basically foster economic reboot and economic development after the COVID-19 crisis. And it all depends, like I said, this is not only a matter of environmental considerations, but it has to do also with the potential, the demonstrable potential in fostering economic recovery. And it depends on how we can work towards this end. And as Houda said, through energy diplomacy, which plays an integral part in harmonizing positions and harmonizing visions towards a common end. And I believe this aspect is a common part. And regarding a point was raised about the region attracting competitive bids in sustainable energy solutions. That is a very promising sign, but we also have to be aware that the Mediterranean region also attracts seemingly appealing propositions in emitting energy technologies. And this is something that we have to be aware of, and we have to take this into consideration. The socio-economic effects, as Radia said, are quite pivotal and integral in tackling the effects of the COVID-19 crisis. And I think there is a lot of potential when it comes to achieving this in the Mediterranean region, particularly through the sustainable energy value chain complementarity, as the region is not only full of potential for renewable energy, but also there are plenty of major market players and industries who can have a major role in such a green economic recovery. Radia also mentioned energy efficiency being integral to in this regard, and I fully agree. In the UFM, we work towards enhancing the deployment of energy efficiency measures, being a low-hanging fruit. And we have just recently launched a working group on energy efficiency in appliances. We also integrate energy efficiency in our work and our portfolio when we work with local authorities. Subsidies and market distortions are quite a challenge, and they will remain quite a challenge for a while. But I think there are opportunities here, especially for oil importing countries. If subsidies are managed and gradually reduced during this phase, the effects can be quite tolerable for those economies. Particularly, it can be an advantage for the budgets of oil importing countries. And basically, that's my commentary on all of that, what has been discussed. And thank you once again for your invitation. And I would like to hear some feedback from our attendees and get some questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ahmed. This is very good, and I'm sure that the Union for Mediterranean will have a great role to push forward energy efficiency and renewable for a more sustainable future for energy markets, and also in terms of the circular economy. And I think, I believe personally that this is going to be one serious pillar for the recovery and resilience in the region. Now, I would like to move to a poll that we have prepared. So then we ask some questions to the audience. We have a very high level audience that they are listening to our panelists. And I would like to hear their view on a few questions. Kinga, please, can you? Yeah. So you have this first question. Do you see COVID pandemic as an opportunity or rather threat for green economy in your country? Please answer. I will answer myself too. Okay, we will see the results after. I have a couple of questions from the audience, and I'm going to read it for the panelists. The first question is, how do you see the perspectives of the oil market in 2021 and beyond? This first question is addressed to Raja and to Houda, if you have questions.
Okay, sorry. Thank you. I think the pandemic is a game changer. Will affecting how we're gonna go back to our normal life. And this will affect also demand on energy. And this will have its effect on the demand side on oil and fossil energy sources. So we expected down the road as an effect of pandemic and change of behavior of people and maybe reducing the use of energy as maybe more work from home, shifting, in this case, a reduction in growth, the effect happens globally. Maybe trade protections will happen and have also a bigger impact on the global economy, and that's what can be expected also after this pandemic. All this will have its effect on energy demand. For the price of oil for the rest of 2020, the expectation is might reach 30 to 35. This is the average, a little bit above and below. Maybe 2021, the maximum I can see happens maybe 45. I do not see it will increase beyond this number. As I said, it's this recession, first of all, is unclear how many months will continue. Is it going to be W or just V or U in some region and P in some other regions? All this aspect will affect the demand and the forecast. The aspect which will affect also the demand and the balance price is the supply side. How many of the supply side will get out of the market? What we've seen on oil, a little bit the expensive productions of oil, they might be getting out of the market. So some of the supply will be out of the market, and coming back to the market will be a little bit difficult. So this will give more space for the price to a little bit increase. But on the other side, the demand side does not increase that much as we expected, as business will not go back to normal. Yes, there's some hope things will, after the opening of lockdown of most of the country, we'll see an improvement, maybe a little bit jump, but it will go to normal. And the normal for 2020, I think, will be around the 35, 21 will be around 45.
Thank you, Raja. Around the same question, which this is from Sergio Arzeni from INSME in Italy. How the current situation of the oil market will affect the oil and gas projects offshore, Cyprus, Lebanon, Israel, Egypt, and the Adriatic. And then we would like to hear a little bit about the situation in Libya, if you can shed some light on this, and within the current situation of the General Haftar controlling the Libya oil resources. This is more for Houda.
Thank you very much. So first of all, let me say that I do agree with Raja in the impact for oil, and it would be interesting to see whether we could tap the potential of energy and efficiency in the future in terms of demand due to the change of the behavior. So this is something that would be the impact of COVID. As for the current situation of oil and gas market and how it will affect, what we are hearing and we are seeing is that many companies have already informed that they are cutting their exploration and development budget, and this is for this year, and this is impacting the countries you mentioned, and therefore we are going to see a postponement of the scheduling of drilling activities. This is actually what is happening. So in Cyprus, in Lebanon are concrete examples. Egypt and Israel may be impacted as well, but this is not a long-term trend. So this is just a short-term trend which will affect the operations for this year. The situation in Libya is quite different. So this is not absolutely not linked to the COVID and not to the situation. So it is difficult for me to answer. So this is really a political issue, how long it will continue, and so nothing to deal with the reduction of the demand nor the COVID situation. And so the second question was, no, that's it.
Can you say something about the political impact, if you can, on Algeria and Egypt?
In Libya or in general? So for Algeria and Egypt, yes. Yeah. The IMF is telling us that the only country which is not going to have a negative economic impact seems to be Egypt. And we know that they run to a different lockdown than in the region. So we do not expect negative economic growth this year in Egypt. And therefore, we should not expect a negative political impact on upstream activities. The relations with foreign companies are quite good between Egypt government and the companies. So the political impact, we do not see there will be any problem. So it is much more that Egypt remains an attractive country for exploration and for the companies, and we are just living this special period. That is why I said this is just for this year, and the decision of the companies due to the crisis. So it is just matter, I would say, to delay due to the reduction of those companies' capital expenditure in their activities. In Algeria, we have more or less a similar situation, but of course we are running through a different political situation because the change which has occurred in Algeria is quite new, and we are now contemplating a new, we have some uncertainties in terms of the new hydrocarbons law, which we hope will be much more attractive. So that plays a certain role in what we see as a wait-and-see approach by foreign companies, but this situation, of course, is now worsened with the situation of COVID, but hopefully it will be restored. So this is how we see in Algeria and Egypt.
Thank you very much. There is another question on the digital technologies. So whoever can step in onto this. So how do you see the COVID crisis pushing the shift to digital technologies like blockchains, for example, and then changing the organization structures of the energy projects? And also even, we could even think of, for example, increasing peer-to-peer blockchain renewable energy-based exchanges of energy in the region. So how do you see this development? Especially nowadays, we are talking a lot about digital economy and how the digital economy has been quite impressive within this crisis. Please, who can venture into this? Radia, probably?
Yeah, but if I want just to jump on something for the Arab countries, because this is my portfolio, where I just want to add that for Lebanon, already the Total did the well, it's dry well, and whatever it happened in Lebanon, the contract is there, it has nothing to do with COVID-19 or the oil prices. It's much more on the political and financial crisis that the country lived before that situation. And the Total is moving under the contract normally. The same for Qatar, who already launched the additional capacity for the LNG and the offshore, and this has been launched without any impact, so this should be recognized. However, I would just to add that for the case of Algeria, I'm not actually, I cannot judge on the fiscal regime, but what I want to say that the attractivity of the market in terms of the oil and gas exploration is not only linked to that, it's also linked to how this could somehow the other environment in terms of facilitating the private sector, which is still not dominated by national companies. In terms of digitalization, we have seen a lot of innovation, and actually I think one of the added value that I've seen very well evolving in African continents that I think you cover a little bit in your portfolio, that this helps to improve in terms of electricity access, more importantly in terms of renewable energy. And digitalization actually, it's one of the key element, I would say, for the circular economy that should be considered in order not only to obtain a deficiency. It's not just looking to the demand side management, it's already embedding very, very simple measures that could really improve the process and obviously make the whole value chain very well integrated. For renewable energy, just to complement your question, the value chain, and when we see the impact of oil prices, whatever would happen, we forgot that there's difference between dealing with or without China, and China makes the whole difference. So if the global is not uptaken in terms of economy, if China, as they already started opening and we see already the traffic started, then we'll make the change because they dominate the value chain, not only in pharmaceutical and medical, but also everything related to value chain in renewable energy and sustainable energy. And basically, wherever we see the oil crisis, the oil is not competing in renewables in the same marketplace because we are talking about power and transportation. So only technology would make a difference to make them both competing. And just to complement on the question, that basically, because we talk about digitalization as well, for renewable energy, what's the major element that is still uncertain, that basically they much more are dependent on minerals than on oil and products. And this is what people need to understand. So renewable energy will uptake in the electricity market. There is nothing to say about that, but it will depend on the recovery of the economy in mineral sectors, but not in the oil market, and independently how this will evolve.
Thank you, Radia. Another question to Houda. Can you give some details on the principle of energy diplomacy that you mentioned in terms of the tools, mechanisms, and under which umbrella this is to be tackled? This is a question from Ashraf Kadam.
Thank you very much. So my statement was to say, indeed, we have this umbrella already. I talked about the Barcelona process. So as far as we talk about the Euro-Mediterranean energy cooperation and partnership. And so we have this Barcelona process, which is here for more than 30 years now, 25 years, sorry, we are celebrating this. And so we are, now we have this umbrella of the Union for the Mediterranean. And what we need to do is to, we are all, how to say, the results obtained by this Euro-Mediterranean cooperation could be better enhanced and could be better than what we have foreseen until now. And this is why we are working, and we have these 3 platforms as well that Ahmed mentioned. We have the players. So we have the context, we have the umbrella, we have the Euro-Mediterranean ministries, we have the agencies, we have the industry. So we have the dream team, I would say, frankly. And what we need to do is really now to assess, and this is what probably Ahmed will talk better than me about that, what we are working on a ministerial meeting in order to voice to the ministers what is needed in order for this diplomacy to work, why we need it, because we need regional integration, we need market integration for the energy. Each country can do his homework, but it is only all together that we will succeed to the best. So this is, so the instruments, it is, I cannot answer this in 5 minutes, but I can, to summarize, we have the Euro-Mediterranean cooperation, we have the best players, and we need to work together in order to set up the tools and the instruments in order to succeed. To converge, so that the 2 shores of the Mediterranean converge, because still we have a lot of differences between both, of course, between each country, but between the north and the south, and this gap is going to be even worse, and we are facing the same challenges if we go to energy transition, sustainable development, climate change. It has been said the Mediterranean region is among the hot spots, so this is a common problem that energy could solve as well, and we need to work for it together.
Thank you, Houda. Another question to all the panelists, perhaps Ahmed also could step into this. What are the measures that are needed to support the energy transition during and after the COVID-19 crisis?
Thank you, Reem. I think this is actually related to the previous question regarding the measures to enhance energy cooperation and energy through energy diplomacy. It involves a very specific and a very important multi-stakeholders approach. You cannot only work on the level of governments, you cannot only work on the level of academia, you cannot only work with private sector. You need a multi-stakeholders approach that would bring this all together and put it into something that is coherent and regionally relevant and appealing to policymakers throughout the region. And another tool comes in this regard is a multi-stakeholder, consensus building. Consensus building among member states is a very important aspect of this energy diplomacy, and in the Union for the Mediterranean, it's something that we often tackle. Our organization works by consensus. So at the end of the day, we have to see how can we work on the intersection of interests and work on the common aspects among member states, and to move forward and to build something that is tangible, that is concrete, that is basically visible to people on the ground. And that's what we try to do. One final aspect that I can think of is focusing on demonstration, focusing on pilot projects, focusing on things that can materialize is quite important. You cannot only promote successful methods by simply talking about them. You promote successful methods and best practices by showcasing them, by showcasing how effective they can be and how tangible they are. That's my 2 cents on the matter. So,
anyone else would like to step in onto this question on energy transition measures? Okay. There is another question from Ambassador of Ghana in the European Union. So it's about the impact on the aviation industry and the price of fuel. So do you see any more drastic drops on the price of fuel going forward? Maybe Houda can step in.
So which means that the impact of the reduction of fuel presently, for the time being, yeah?
Yes.
But what we contemplate is, for the time being, is this reduction. What the experts are, we are not experts, so we rely on the price, or oil prices. What the experts are telling us is that is indeed going to continue minimum for 1 year. Like I said, we foresee that it will come to $43 or $45 the barrel by 2023. But what we are hearing so far is that we expect indeed that the oil prices will remain relatively slow for 1 year or minimum 2. For instance, of course, it will affect all the sectors, by the way, automatically.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. The last question from Paul McAllister. What influence is the United States likely to have on the MENA and energy environment over the next few years? That's a difficult one.
May I? No, I can undertake this question. Actually, one of the things that was not mentioned, the geopolitical environment that is, how to say that, dominant with specifically linked to the oil and gas markets in the MENA region. Some elements that were not addressed and we didn't spoke about, that in any case, the crisis, when we start about the oil glut, it was even 10 years ago, we were speaking about the shale, and that some people may think it's impacting everyone in the regions the same. No, because it depends on the quality of your crude. So the most impacted in Africa, for example, Algeria and Nigeria, because they have the light crude, and which is similar to shale liquids. So the impact is somehow it's in terms of all the fights and all what's happened in order to reach the marginal cost of supply of the shale resources, and obviously what happened during the war, Russia, the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia, and they couldn't reach an agreement till the COVID-19, hopefully. Little bit impacted in somehow the US market, and obviously it would have in the future impact on the region. Basically, the fundamentals will continue in somehow making impact on the oil market. However, we will still see threats in terms of looking how the US will look at from the energy security perspective towards what's happening in Iraq and Iran specifically, and this has nothing to do with the nuclear. It's much more on booking the reserves and ensuring long-term energy security, and it depends also on the elections after Trump. So this is a fundamental element that will, I think, the COVID-19 would impact in a way tremendously what would be the first, I would say, president of the States, and will impact how the private sector will deal with the crisis and impact the region indirectly, not in a short term, but will come in the next 5 years.
Okay. So for the next, I would like to show the answers to the poll of the participants. So 75% see that it's an opportunity, the COVID, for the green economy, okay? And then 40% see that this is the transition is happening in the next 5 years, and 40 in the next 10 years. Okay, so that's good to know. So there is a hope. So it means that most probably this COVID is a kind of a blessing to a green transition in the energy market. Now, I would like to ask all the participants to switch on their cameras. I think Kinga can give them the permission for this, so we can have a group picture before ending this panel discussion. Just want also to let you know that the next panel discussion will be on the 4th of June, the same on Thursday at the same time for normally 90 minutes. And it will cover the COVID-19 policy responses and socio-economic mitigation plans first assessment. At EMEA, we have developed a monitor, a tool to assess all the policy answers, and then we are following the Europe, Mediterranean, and Africa pretty much every week to see how they evolve in terms of the contagion key indicators, also the containment policies, decontainment or deconfinement policies, but also in terms of socioeconomic mitigation plans and what should be done going forward. And obviously, the beginning is the preparedness of the healthcare sectors. So this is on the 4th of June. Thank you all for joining our panel discussion today. And I hope to see you for the next time.